Imagine a world where the line between power and fear is blurred, where unsettling rituals defined the lives of those who believed they held dominion over others. Many people think of slavery as a time of brutal oppression, a dark chapter in history marked solely by suffering and inhumanity. But hidden within this narrative are bizarre rituals that slave owners believed would ensure their control and prosperity over the enslaved. What if I told you that some of these rituals were not only grotesque, but also reveal deep fears and insecurities? Take, for instance, the use of folk magic and voodoo. Did slave owners really believe in the power of voodoo to control their slaves? The answer is yes, many did. In desperate attempts to maintain control, they turned to these practices, believing that voodoo would protect them from rebellion. Rituals included protective charms and offerings to spirits, showcasing a mindset driven by paranoia and fear. This belief in the supernatural reflected their inner turmoil, an acknowledgement that their power was precarious, reliant on fear rather than genuine authority. Understanding these beliefs provides insight into the psychological landscape of slave ownership and the extreme lengths to which these individuals would go to suppress their own fears. But the rituals didn't stop at folk magic. What extreme measures did slave owners take to instill fear among their slaves? Punishments were often public spectacles, designed to serve as grim warnings to others. Ritualistic punishments included branding, whipping, and even more severe forms of physical mutilation, all framed as acts of discipline. These brutal acts weren't merely punitive. They were a method of asserting dominance and control through sheer terror. This violent culture didn't just dehumanize the enslaved, it also twisted the minds of the perpetrators. When we examine these practices, we gain insight into a world where violence was normalized, revealing the horrific reality of human nature under the guise of control. How did slave owners justify their brutal control? Some held extravagant celebrations, believing they had successfully tamed or enslaved individuals. These events were not mere gatherings, they were exaggerated displays of power, showcasing obedient slaves as trophies of their dominance. This bizarre celebration reflects a psychological need for validation among slave owners, emphasizing their perceived superiority. These rituals reveal the disturbing normalization of viewing human beings as property, dehumanizing them in the most grotesque ways. So, as we delve deeper into this dark history, we must confront these unsettling truths that expose the complexities of power, fear, and humanity's darker side. Many people think of slavery as a time marked solely by brutal oppression, suffering, and inhumanity. Yet, hidden within this dark chapter of history are bizarre rituals that slave owners believed would ensure their control and prosperity over the enslaved. Did slave owners really believe in the power of voodoo to control their slaves? The answer is yes. Many slave owners turned to folk magic and voodoo practices to exert control over their slaves, driven by an underlying fear of rebellion. In their desperate attempts to maintain power, they engaged in rituals that included protective charms and offerings to spirits. This reliance on supernatural beliefs highlights the deep-seated fear and paranoia that often motivated slave owners. They thought that these rituals would provide them with protection against uprisings and ensure their dominance over those they enslaved. By understanding these beliefs, you gain insight into the psychological landscape of slave ownership. It reveals the extreme lengths to which these individuals went to suppress their fears, showcasing how even the most powerful can feel vulnerable when faced with the threat of losing control. This leads us to question, how effective were these rituals in truly maintaining power? Now, let's delve into the extreme measures slave owners took to instill fear. What kinds of punishment were employed to keep the enslaved in line? Punishments were often public spectacles, crafted to serve as grim warnings to other slaves. Ritualistic punishments included horrific acts such as branding, whipping, and various forms of physical mutilation, all framed under the guise of discipline. These acts were not merely about punishment, they were about asserting dominance and control through sheer terror. The goal was to create an atmosphere of fear that would dissuade rebellion and instill a sense of hopelessness among the enslaved. Examining these brutal practices provides a stark look into the violent culture of slavery and the deep dehumanization that took place. Now consider how slave owners justified their brutal control over the enslaved. Some went as far as to hold celebrations, convinced they had successfully tamed their slaves. These events often involved exaggerated displays of power, showcasing obedient slaves as trophies of their dominance. This bizarre form of celebration reveals the psychological need for validation among slave owners. It emphasizes their perceived superiority, as they felt the need to demonstrate their control publicly. Understanding these rituals sheds light on the twisted narratives that slave owners constructed to rationalize their horrific actions. Through these rituals, you uncover a chilling view of how the dynamics of power and control played out in such an inhumane context, prompting us to reflect on the lengths to which individuals will go to justify their actions, no matter how abhorrent. Some slave owners believed they had successfully tamed their enslaved individuals, and this twisted belief led to bizarre celebrations. These events were not mere gatherings, they were exhibitions of power and dominance, where owners showcased what they perceived as obedient slaves as trophies. Can you imagine the depths of validation they sought in these moments? During these celebrations, the atmosphere was charged with an unsettling mix of pride and superiority. The slave owners would often exaggerate their displays, highlighting the control they believed they had established over their human property. This bizarre celebration reveals a profound psychological need for validation among slave owners. They sought to affirm their perceived superiority in a society that often measured worth by race and control. These events served to reinforce their belief in their authority and to normalize the act of owning another human being. Understanding these rituals is crucial. They highlight the twisted narratives that slave owners created to rationalize their actions and justify their brutality. For example, imagine a gathering where slave owners proudly parade their enslaved individuals, labeling them as obedient and well-trained. The enslaved individuals caught in this spectacle were stripped of their humanity, reduced to mere objects to be displayed. This practice was not only a celebration of their perceived success, but also a dark reflection of the owner's insecurities and the need to assert dominance in a world fraught with fear of rebellion. However, the reality was much different for the enslaved individuals. While the owners celebrated, the enslaved often lived in fear and despair, fully aware of the violence that could erupt at any moment if they dared to resist. This stark contrast between celebration and oppression is what makes these rituals so unsettling. As you explore these strange celebrations, think about what they reveal about the human psyche. The lengths to which slave owners went to maintain their sense of control and superiority underscore the complexities of power dynamics during this dark period in history. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of humanity and the twisted rationalizations that can arise in the face of profound moral failures. In this context, the rituals of celebration serve not only to reinforce the status quo, but also to mask the underlying fears that plagued slave owners, making them desperate to demonstrate their power over those they viewed as lesser beings. The first sale of a slave was a significant event, marked by unsettling rituals that signified ownership and control. Imagine a ceremony where a slave owner, surrounded by family and friends, proudly announces the acquisition of a human being. The atmosphere is filled with a twisted sense of pride as they celebrate what they view as a conquest. But behind this facade lies a chilling reality. The ritual objectified the enslaved person, stripping away their humanity. During these ceremonies, slave owners often performed rituals that involved specific actions or words meant to solidify their dominance over the newly acquired slave. This could include the use of symbolic objects, like ropes or chains, to signify the bond of ownership. These acts were deeply ingrained in the culture of slavery, reflecting a disturbing normalization of viewing human beings as mere property. In this context, it's essential to understand the mindset of the slave owners. They believed that by performing these rituals, they were establishing a sense of control not just over the slave, but also over their own insecurities. The act of selling a slave was not just a financial transaction. It was a ritualistic affirmation of power. For the owners, it was about proving their status in a society that equated worth with ownership. However, these rituals also carried a dark irony. While slave owners celebrated their perceived triumphs, the enslaved individuals were often stripped of any agency or dignity. They became trophies in a grotesque game of dominance, their lives reduced to mere commodities to be bought and sold. This stark contrast between the owner's celebrations and the harsh reality faced by the enslaved individuals reveals the depths of dehumanization inherent in the practice of slavery. Analyzing these rituals sheds light on the disturbing lengths to which slave owners would go to justify their actions. They constructed elaborate narratives that framed their ownership as a natural order, convincing themselves that their dominance was not only acceptable but deserved. This psychological framework allowed them to navigate the moral complexities of their actions, all while perpetuating a system built on fear and oppression. Understanding the ritual of the first sale provides critical insight into the culture of slavery and the twisted justifications slave owners employed to rationalize their brutality. It serves as a chilling reminder of how power dynamics can distort human relationships and the lengths to which individuals will go to uphold a system of oppression. You've now seen that the history of slavery is not merely a straightforward tale of oppression, but a complex narrative interwoven with strange rituals. These unsettling practices were not only grotesque but also deeply revealing, exposing the fears and insecurities of those who wielded power over others. The rituals of voodoo and folk magic reflect the lengths to which slave owners went to maintain control, driven by their own anxieties about rebellion and loss of authority. As we explored ritualistic punishments, we uncovered a chilling truth. These acts were not simply disciplinary measures, but strategic displays of dominance. The branding, whipping, and public spectacles served to instill fear and reinforce the dehumanization of enslaved individuals. This brutal culture was built on violence and intimidation, a stark reminder of how far some would go to suppress dissent and maintain a hierarchy based on terror. The celebrations of the taming of slaves highlight another disturbing aspect of this era. These events showcase the psychological needs of slave owners, who sought validation through the display of their power over those they deemed subservient. Celebrating obedience as a trophy reveals the twisted narratives that these individuals created to justify their actions, emphasizing their perceived superiority while simultaneously betraying their deep insecurities. Lastly, the ritual of the first sale encapsulates the normalization of viewing human beings as mere property. The ceremonies marking the acquisition of a slave reflect not only a perverse sense of pride pride among owners, but also a chilling acceptance of a dehumanizing practice. Analyzing this ritual allows us to confront the disturbing reality of slavery and the societal structures that permitted such views to flourish. As you reflect on the history of slavery, remember these strange and unsettling rituals. They reveal deeper truths about power dynamics, the human psyche, and the lengths to which people will go to assert control over others. Understanding these complexities not only sheds light on a dark chapter of our past, but also invites us to consider how the echoes of these beliefs and practices might still resonate in today's society. By acknowledging these truths, we take an essential step toward confronting the legacies of oppression and fostering a more humane world. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical tales. Don't miss out on new videos. Hit the notification bell to stay updated.